So our final factor that causes the beginning of the Renaissance is an idea called humanism. The definition we see on the screen, a variety of ethical theory and practice that emphasizes reason, scientific inquiry, and human fulfillment in the natural world, and often rejects the importance of a belief in God, is a modern definition of humanism. Some of these ideas weren't current in the early Renaissance period. Science is primarily an 18th century idea, and very few people in the early Renaissance period were rejecting the importance of a belief in God. This was still an incredibly religious society. But the idea of humanism is still incredibly influential in the art of the Renaissance. So what that actually means is that we start to see art and society in general focuses much more on the human condition or the human experience in the world. And this leads to things like taking your individual personality more into account. So prior to the Renaissance, your job was probably whatever your father's job had been before you. In the Renaissance, we start to see individual personality taken more into account. Do you have a talent? Do you have an aptitude for a certain kind of skill? You might be apprenticed to a person who has that skill rather than just automatically following in your father's footsteps. We also do see an emphasis on secular life. This is an incredibly religious period in European history. But secular life is gradually becoming more important, and we are seeing a separation of the church and the state. And this interest in secular life is largely driven by an interest in classical, that is Greek or Roman, philosophy and literature. And these texts, these Greek and Roman classics, are used to teach people ideas like patriotism, participation in government. So in Italy in particular, we see several republics in this period where the government is elected by voting. So we aren't born knowing how to vote. Somebody has to teach us how to do that. And we also see that used to start a defense of state institutions. So these are things we would still recognize today. Fire brigades, policemen, or some version of trying to reduce or prevent crime. We see social volunteers, people who are taking care of the poor and the needy. And many of these ideas are being reinforced by classical literature. We also see a study of new fields that haven't changed much since the Greeks and the Romans. So we start to study fields like geometry, optics, how we see the world, and anatomy. And one of the places that bears fruit for us is that in art, we start to embrace a naturalistic figure. So when we were talking about St. Francis in the last video, we said St. Francis says the whole world is beautiful because it's all God's creation. And humanism builds on that idea to say that we should try to create human beings in art as naturalistically as possible. We should make people look as authentic, as much like people as we can. Because we have this ability to study them, to understand them, and to represent their differences. And these new areas of study and this embrace of an individual personality all play into a new understanding of art.